There is no doubt that the resurgence of vinyl records has increased the sales of turntables. Now, the challenge with that is that everyone with an opinion is recommending a table for you, and a lot of those recommendations are just flat out wrong. They're recommending horrible tables, some tables that haven't had their technology updated in decades, and they're telling you it's the best table for you to spend your money on. Listen, this is a non-sponsored, non-financially influenced video where we're going to share with you the real deal on what to buy when you're a beginner, depending on your price range. We have an option no matter what your price range is. I am going to bring you in on a chat that I had with my good buddy VSS, where we talk about not only the resurgence of records, but also what turntables you should buy no matter your budget. We're going to give you a couple different options, and then there's also going to be some great advice that any beginner should know. So stick around, go grab yourself a cup of joe, get comfortable, and let's go. All right, VSS, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, or should I say good morning to you. Why don't you tell the world a little bit about yourself, what got you into this hobby, and maybe even where you're hailing from?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, so how much time do you have? But it's nice to, here's my latte, Mr. Vinyl Latte. Nice to actually put a face to the typing. But yeah, I've had a funny journey with vinyl. When I was a kid, you know, all the other kids would ask for video games and all sorts of stuff, but I got into music pretty young. My dad, when he finished university, with his first paycheck, he bought a Marantz 4070 quad amp, Torrens TD160, an Acco tape player, and some Sansui speakers. And when I was a kid, I was just fascinated by music itself, and we had my dad's Torrens was on a custom sort of built record cabinet next to our fireplace at home, and you'd have to climb up on top of it and put a record on and drop the needle. And there was a rule in our house that you're only allowed to play music loud when you're either cleaning the house or doing the gardening. So I'd whack a record on and crank it up and sort of, you know, Hendrix and Neil Young and Sabbath, and my dad was into a lot of blues and stuff. So, I used to, before I could even ride a bike, I used to tape sort of cassettes from his records and make mixtapes. And I reflect upon the environmental impact of all the AA batteries I churned through. As a kid, I had this brick Walkman that was my dad's, and I used to play tapes until they snapped, and then I'd get some, like, I think you call it cello tape over there, and like splice the tape back together. And I remember going to, like back in the day, back then, like there was always a TV or a hi-fi repair shop in every suburb because things weren't reliable as they were now. So my dad, I would go with him back to this, you know, Eastern European guy at his repair shop, and my dad would be saying, "You fixed this tape player a month ago and it's broken again." And it was all because I'd be playing my splice tapes, and it'd go to auto stop, and I'd just hold down play until it'd go, go through. So, and then I got a paper round, and I grew up in a nice area. So when the things like the Bose lifestyle systems and mini systems were being sold and all the rage, all these people were sort of upgrading to these, you know, satellite speakers and subs and little systems with little speakers. And so we'd have this thing every month or two, and it'd be called Hard Rubbish Collection. So people would put out their, you know, 70s high-end amplifiers and turntables and stuff. So, you know, to be picked up at the rubbish because everyone was falling for these, like, Bose advertising and all this stuff. So I'd pick them up on my paper round and sort of, like, grab a speaker, put it in the bushes, take the other one home on my BMX, and then go back, pick up the other one. And so when I was 13, I sort of said to my parents, who were both educators, like, can I do an electronics course? Because I wanted to learn how to fix, you know, I wanted to understand how they worked, because some days it would be raining when I'd pick something up, or something would be broken. And then my parents, both being teachers, ended up agreeing to send me to night school, and I had to get special dispensation as a kid to go and do courses. And then I did work experience at a guitar shop and learned how to fix guitars, and then did an apprenticeship in electronics, and just all these opportunities like what we were talking about before came up. And yeah, music was my biggest passion, and figuring out things work was secondary, and did all these qualifications, met all these people, and one thing led to another, and yeah, ended up being the music guy. And it was funny because people used to come around, you know, at the lowest apex of records being produced, and they'd go, "Why do you collect vinyl? It's horrible. It's noisy, and all the pops and the clicks." And I'd close all the curtains and sit them down, and I'd get something out like Jeff Buckley Grace, and turn all the lights off so to heighten your hearing, because when you remove one sense, the others raise. And so I'd leave them in the room in the dark and play, you know, Hallelujah, and come in, and 9 times out of 10 they'd be crying, and they'd go, "I'd never ever heard music sound like that before." And then, you know, a few weeks later I'd get a message or a phone call saying, "Where do I start?" You know, I gave up all my records in the 80s and 90s, and you know, but yeah, just from that one experience listening to vinyl on a really high quality system, yeah, it's kind of breathtaking. One of the greatest joys I've been getting the last few years is not having to charge people for my time. So you know, it's frustrating at times because there's a lot of fraudiophile around, I like to call it, but yeah, it's good to connect people with good sound and connect with good people. So
you've definitely helped a lot of people in a community, and as you said, myself included, there is definitely times where I was messaging you with some challenges or just even general questions, trying to help make sense, because this world can be very confusing. There's tons of options. Some of it is marketing hype. Some of it actually is, you know, it's real behind a marketing hype. And unless you have experience like yourself, sometimes it's hard to kind of filter out. To your point, fraudiophile telling you go one direction, while it's actually more advisable to perhaps go in a different direction. So with that being said, I mean, when people come and approach you, what are some common questions that you tend to get hit with by beginners that are getting ready to buy their first turntable?
Yeah, well, the first thing is that because there was so long between, you know, the popularity and you know, it being the main format of music, and then it reviving, you know, 20, 30 years later, there wasn't that intergenerational transfer of knowledge that just occurs socially between, you know, people and their parents. So what often gets forgotten is that turntables are a precision instrument. Like they're tracking a groove thinner than a human hair. So when you're looking at buying your first turntable, you're not looking at it with that perspective that it's really fiddly. You know, if your records are dirty or scratched, they don't sound very good. So you're sort of walking into this, you know, this hobby that, you know, where everyone tends to sort of recommend their own gear. And what you want to do is you want to Google what's sort of the cheapest turntable I can get, you know, that's okay. And the problem is, now that it's popular, there's thousands of YouTube videos out where people are saying, oh, you know, the AT LP60 is fine, you know, heaps of people have got them. But back 20 years ago, when sort of they were released, it was known as a table that was more made for people that, you know, kept their collections of records and they wanted to play their old records. There wasn't anything around at the time, so Audio Technica were like, oh, well, there's a market here for a really cheap turntable. So they got a mechanism that was already in existence, and that situation where the fine instrument wasn't really considered, to put it politely. So they put out these auto, sort of players so people could actually buy something with a preamp in it to plug into their MIDI system or whatever they had. Now, the problem with that is they were made for sort of vintage records that didn't have a lot of bass and didn't have big dynamic swings, because when records were mastered before the 2000s, they were made so you could play them on a Fisher-Price turntable. They weren't made for high-end sort of setups. Like back then, Mofi would put out, remasters where all this bass would be put back. And it's to the point where people would say, like, oh, Mofi, they've got the Smiley EQ, they've got heaps of bass and heaps of treble. But all they were actually doing was making the response flat again, because previously they'd have to roll off the bass because kids with their suitcase players playing their Beatles records, if there was any bass, the records would skip. So what happened was in the 2010s, like after the AT-LP 60 and the AT-LP 120, which came out in 2009, a couple of American companies, U-Turn and Fluance, were like, well, if they can sell those turntables, there's a market here where we can build turntables at a price, but make them actually really good by comparison. And so what they were looking at was, how do we make a turntable for $180 US dollars, which is what the AT-LP 60 used to be. And they figured out that if they made a good tone arm, a basic bearing that wasn't too bad, and like a MDF veneered, plinth, they could make a fine instrument for the same price as the Audio-Technica decks, but actually sound pretty good for the price.
Yeah, but after all those years, though, I mean, wouldn't Audio-Technica actually update the 60 and the 120 to support today's modern records, right? I mean, does that make sense?
That's the biggest problem I have with them. They actually haven't mechanically changed them.
So it's the same turntable that you would have bought back in the day, just with new parts, but no new technology.
Yeah, so what they did with the AT-LP 120 is they adjusted the anti-skate system because the springs kept on failing. So the only time they thought, oh, we need to make a change here, was because it was affecting their profit. Whereas Fluance and U-Turn, they've evolved their decks over the time since they came out. Like their tone arm on the U-Turns changed a little bit. And what they did was, when it started becoming popular again, they started making a range of upgrades that you could buy for them. Now, would I recommend you go and buy the RT-85? I actually don't, because it's still got the tone arm that was initially designed for a $180 turntable. So what I do say to people that asking for, what is the minimum you'd spend and what would you do, I always say the RT-82 is actually the best budget turntable to start with, because it's got your anti-skate, it's got your, you can adjust the tracking force, it's got everything you need to start out. But when you go above that RT-82 level, you're looking at, your acrylic platter, which in the systems that these turntables are made for, you're not going to hear any difference. So if you're going to start out, you sort of look at the RT-82, and you want to avoid having the, and this is a common thing that happens, people want to get the phono preamp built in, but the problem is when you have that going into your turntable, that means that you're compromising on some other component to fit the cost of that preamp in. So, and the other thing is, a lot of people don't realise that your preamp makes as much difference as your actual cartridge, because it amplifies the signal hundreds and hundreds of times. So even small changes to a phono preamp can make a huge difference. So if I was going to recommend a budget turntable, if you're just starting out, I'd say get the RT-82. I say that over the U-Turn because it has adjustable tracking force. But if you're going to go above that, and obviously, as I just said, you get a separate preamp. Even the Behringer I think they're about $40 over there for the, absolute cheapest you'd want to spend, or like $100 for an HiFi basic phono pre. And the good thing about doing that too is it's something you can always keep. So as you upgrade your turntable or your cartridge, you can keep using that phono preamp until you sort of go a bit silly, like we do with our stuff. But so you go the RT82, a basic separate phono preamp, and then if you want to spend more than that and sort of get into the entry level audiophile space, we'll call it, over in the US, you're better off buying the Project Debut Carbon Evo. And what I had my first project table in about 2005, and it was because one of the HiFi guys I used to deal with, his name is Conrad, so I used to just call him Rad. But back then, Project were sort of an Eastern European brand, and they had a bit of a reputation for sort of being fairly basic, and I'd done what a lot of people do and sort of listened to that. So he convinced me to try a Project One Expression 3, I think it was, and I had a Rega table at the time, and I was blown away. So what Project have been doing over the years is they currently make more turntables than anyone else worldwide. They hone their designs. So every year the Project Debut series has improved incrementally. And so you've got to the point now where the Project Debut Evo has a fantastic tone arm, great bearing, really quiet motor. You can get it in a huge range of colours, so it matches everything. And it's very basic, but if it doesn't have arm height adjustment to adjust your tracking angle, but it comes with, in the US, the Sumiko, and everywhere else with the Audiophile series. But most of the cartridges in those ranges from Audiophile, like the Quintet or the 2M, they're all a similar height, so it doesn't matter too much if you're compromising on that. But if you start out with a Project Debut Carbon, you get really good sound. And if you look out in the US, you'll always find an open box one for $100 less, so you're looking at around $500.
Just so I'm keeping stock, we have at the start the Fluance RT82 would be your kind of budget turntable, and that's probably what, sub $250 for one of those?
I think they're about $250.
Okay. And then we get into tier 2, which is about doubling our budget, getting into the $500 range, which is the Project Carbon Debut Evo. Is that correct? Am I following along right?
Yeah, that's right. So the Rega P2 is also a really good option, P1, P2, around the price of the Project, but for some reason they can sell the Project sort of cheaper than the Rega range over there. But yeah, I would, if you're going with a Fluance, I don't, or the U-turn, I don't recommend sort of, because when you're paying $500 or $600 for either the Rega RT85 or the U-turn custom, you're paying for like a acrylic platter and a better cartridge. Whereas it's always my best advice to, when you're buying a turntable, you want to focus on the quality of the turntable. That's what you want to spend your money on. You don't want to be paying a turntable manufacturer for a better cartridge, because once that cartridge wears out, you're left with the turntable, which is the, sort of meant to be the precision instrument that's at the center of your system.
Yeah, that's right. And you can always change your cartridge later, right? So spend the money up front on a solid table. And then if you want to upgrade, you can do that at a later time. So I'm 100% with you on that. The core component is what's important. Changing your cartridge can actually be fun. It could be a fun way to keep your turntable interesting, as well as experimenting with different phono preamps.
And that's the other thing. When you're buying cartridges, just be patient. Don't look at upgrading it straight away. Like, I know there's a temptation to go, oh, these people say the blue stylus is heaps better than the red. But the problem is, when you go to the blue, say the Audiophile 2M red stylus to the blue stylus, you're never going to go back and use the rest of the hours on that red stylus.
That's
so
right.
And it's the best advice I can give. I've been building systems for 30-something years. The best advice is be patient. So use that cartridge till it dies and put that money away that you're going to use to upgrade your stylus, and throw $10 away, $20 away, because then by the time your stylus actually wears out, you're not just going to the blue. You've got the option of either a new phono preamp and a better cartridge.
That's right.
So the patience thing's really important.
Yeah, I can edify with that. Save up, get what you want early on, especially with the resurgence and all of this extra hardware. And of course you get on the internet, like you said, and it's almost like FOMO. You see everybody talking about something and you want to jump on the wagon because you want to experience what they experience. And you spend all this money on what I call micro upgrades, things that aren't really moving the needle that much, that significant. But when you jump a few levels of equipment into a new realm, if you will, that's the big difference, right? So for instance, your RT82, you can change the cartridge all you want, but when you get into that next level turntable, it's going to be so much better experience for your records than just buying your next cartridge, right? Put the money towards quality components that you can upgrade are really going to make a significant difference in your experience and your listening enjoyment. Yeah,
of course. And it was a topic we were talking about this morning on one of the gear channels I'm on. But there was a guy that said, "Oh, look, I've got a debut carbon Esprit and this and this and this, and I'm looking at spending, this much." And his system he built, 10 years ago, for the debut carbon was, let's say $500, and then you're going to an $800 or $900 table now. When you consider inflation, like the quality of that table now is sort of similar to what he was already using. So,
right.
Your suggestion is just be patient. And what you can do is keep that table, maybe change your cartridge and spend what you want to spend on 3 things, but do it on 2. So your amp and speakers, for example. And something that, there's often this recommendation to spend more money on speakers by proportion than anything else. And this is a common thing that's on, Budget Audiophile and, forums like that. Spend more on speakers, that's the ratio. But it's actually a really, to put it bluntly, there's a saying we use in Australia, and you say, you can't polish a turd. So if your source isn't that great, and your amplifier isn't strong enough to power your speakers, these speakers aren't going to fix anything that comes before it. It's just,
that's right.
It's impossible. And it's the same with the room treatment. Like people say, oh, you've got this great stereo, but you could spend a couple of $100 on some carpet and some 2x4, and it can't make the resolution of the speakers any greater. It's not going to fix a basic cartridge, on a turntable that you can't adjust to get it to read properly. So, you need to balance. And like you said before, if you be patient, so say you've got a budget, in mind to do your whole stereo. If you do one component, you end up getting something really nice, and then you wait a few years, and then you buy something, and you end up with your turntable and your amplifier that's really nice. Once you get a good amplifier, it'll power anything. And then, so by the time you've done your, in 10 years' time, you've got this system that's up here. Whereas if you do it incrementally, you end up spending more often, and the sum of your system isn't as good because you've been balancing and upgrading more for a smaller improvement. Whereas if you be patient, like I said before, I've got a couple of accounts. I've had to work for a while, so I've got, a speaker account, a turntable account with a little bit of money going in each week. And then by the time I want to do something, there's actually a lot of money there because I stay patient. Whereas if I'd done sideward steps, I'd have more gear than I already have. But I wouldn't be making those big jumps.
You're spot on. Just saving a little money every time you get money in. If you're working and you get your paycheck, you put a little bit aside for future upgrades. On a course of a year or 2 years or 3, it adds up a lot. It adds up a lot. Another thing that I recommend folks, especially here in America, who love their coffee, and since we're a vinyl latte channel, I'm going to bring it up. But prices of coffee at some of these name brand coffee shops are expensive. And if you're going there every day or twice a day, if you would instead just make your coffee at home and take that money you're going to spend at your local coffee store, and put it towards your budget, you'll see how quickly that adds up at the end of the year. It's quite surprising when you see how much money you spend on just foolish things. So when people say they really can't afford to upgrade, listen, everybody's situation is different. Some people really honestly can't afford to upgrade because of their financial system. A lot of it, though, that I find is just a lack of budgeting and being able to save, right? Being able to save that much amount of money over a period of time without spending it is just too much of like temptation for people, right? They just can't do it. They see, I got $100. I'm going to go blow this on something, right? Instead of saying, no, I need to do this like 5 or 6 more times, get me a couple $100 so I can go make significant upgrades and not put it on credit, not be, financing something or on a loan, because that's never a fun thing to do either. Paying for what you bought yesterday with interest today is never a fun thing.
Yeah, of course. And it's something that we spoke about before we started recording, but this story has been stolen by people, for audiophiles, but it's really funny because back in the day we were talking about before, but this same facet of the hobby is the camaraderie and the community that goes around vinyl. But back in the day, you'd be at a record fair or somewhere, and you'd be flipping through records, and you'd be watching the guy next to you in the corner of your eye going, and they'd pull something out, and you go, shit, like I don't have one of them. Like I wish I'd have grabbed that. And they turn to you and say something like, oh, have you got a copy of this? Or have you heard this? And if you didn't have a copy, you'd say, no, I don't. And they'd take it out and say, I've got a copy, and they'd hand it to you. Whereas now, people flipping through pull that record out and go, oh, shit, this is worth a fair bit on the internet. So I'm going to post a photo of me on Instagram with it, and then I'm going to sell it on Discogs. So the reason I bring that up is when you're talking about being patient and saving, like, what are records over there? They're like $30 or $40. So people are telling you that they can only afford an RT82 and they don't want to go to a project, debut carbon Evo, like it's too much, they can't afford it, but then they bought, 10 or 12 records in that month. So instead, if you'd saved, the records you already have sound a lot better. And it's hard to do, I know, because record collecting is a bit of an addiction, and see these things come up and there's limited numbers, but you want to, get records. But if you just hold up for a couple of months or a year, or just slow it down, when you spend that money on a component in your system, you listen to all the records that you already have again, because you want to hear how much better they sound. And so and the other thing too is that some people don't sort of care about the sound, and it's more about the tangible experience, and that's fine. But it's a good idea to sort of find that balance where, because at certain points it actually sounds a lot better to stream digital music than actually buy records. And the other thing is, when you're playing records, there's a cost. So apart from electricity, but you're wearing your stylus, you're wearing your records, you've got to keep them clean, So if anyone's watching this thinking, oh, these guys have expensive stuff, so they don't know what they're talking about, we've both been there. We've been there at the start. And like I was saying before, I started out picking up people's rubbish and did an electronics course. And that's when my first system started. So, but there's nothing better than making a change to your system and going, I want to hear my favourite albums again in a new light.
It's one of the best parts in my personal experience, is being able to relive your favorites again, because when you do make those significant upgrades, you can definitely hear an audible difference between what you had and what you have now. And it's the same record that you've always played. And that's that is super fun. I hope anybody who's passionate about this hobby has the pleasure of being able to do that significant jump in their equipment where they can experience that, because it is fun. It's something that personally, like when we're not going to get into digital versus analog debate. Okay. But listen, I mean, the difference you get listen to a streaming file is like your headphones or your iPhone or your speakers, right? It's not going to really change too much. I can get better speakers. Maybe I'll have more bass, whatever. But like, that's really it. The whole sound, you can start hearing elements in the music on your record because you upgraded your equipment for better precision and better tracking and extracting the data out. Like, it's almost like it's a whole new record in your collection. So being able to hold on to your precious records that you love, saving up and buying new gear and playing those records, it will be like you just got a new record. And it's going to be an album that you already love, and you're going to hear it a completely different way.
Yeah, and the reason I'm obviously an analog guy, but the reason I brought up digital was because if you're being patient and saving, you could, for the system upgrades and we'll talk about, advice around buying records later, but if while you're saving for these records or the gear upgrade, you can always stream. Like, it's so cheap. So if there's a record that you want that's expensive, just stream it in the meantime. Like,
yeah, that's true. It's very fair.
And when you're looking at there's so many socials pages about, this press has come out, it's the best, and everyone gets FOMO and they say, I have to get it, or I've dug out this, George Piros press from, God knows when. Don't get sucked in. The thing about analog systems is everyone's system sounds different. Everyone's rooms react differently. Everyone has different, hearing abilities, so this person posting on social media is doing it a lot for attention in the first place. But they're saying, get this new press. This is the best because they have it. And it's the same on gear pages. Buy this because I've got it. And when people ask for recommendations, people will naturally recommend what they have. I hardly ever recommend what I have because sometimes it's a bit silly. But so when someone says, here's a new pressing of this, or you're reading on Discogs and people are going, it's the best record I've ever heard, and that album was recorded poorly or anything, just be patient. Accept that people have different experiences. And the other thing is, a lot of people aren't telling you what sort of gear they have. So there'll be people, criticising a pressing and saying, this album skips on track 4, and then 5 other people will say it too. And what a lot of people don't realise, that on a record, players are, again, a precision instrument. So on a better turntable, that record wouldn't skip. So then you're engaging with these people and they're saying, oh, no, it's not my turntable. I've got 200 records that don't skip. This is the first one. And it's almost that insert here line for anyone that gets their first record that skips, on a bassy album or an album with high dynamics. I used to go around to people's houses. They'd ring me up and say, oh, I need my turntable calibrated, or I've got this record that skips, and I'd say it's not the record, I'll set up your turntable. And I'd go out and I'd keep it 1210 in my car, or at 1200, and play it for them, and it wouldn't skip. It never would skip. In decades of repairing turntables and tuning systems, all the things, I've had one album that actually skipped, and I'm not going to bag any companies, but take reviews with a grain of salt. What I recommend people to do is, we're both in the VMP community, and there's people out there like DGS Gribbs, or there's always people you can get to know that have a lot of real experience in this hobby. And also, same with gear. There are companies like shops like Upscale Audio and Kevin. Get to know actual people. Don't go on socials and build an idea around how things, are, because you don't know what the person's background is, or you don't know where they're coming from. So if you build these relationships with people that have tangible experience, they're better to lean on than, taking a shot in the dark, because the worst thing about this hobby is a thing called confirmation bias. So when you get this fandangled pressing arriving at your house, or this bit of gear that, people on budgeted Audiophile have recommended, you sit and listen to it, and because you've made this conscious decision in your head that it's going to sound better, you assume it does because it's your brain confirming that you've spent money, so it must. So I always recommend that people get to know other people, and especially if you've got a local hi-fi store, the people that work in those stores, like hi-fi stores are a dying breed. Thankfully for the vinyl resurgence, they're getting a lot more business and people are getting back into hi-fi. But the people that work in hi-fi stores have weathered the downturn in people being into hi-fi. So you know they're passionate. You'll create a relationship by going in or ringing with a person. You'll get to know whether they're bullshitting you or not. And they're the best resources to get advice from, because I know that there's a saying, you know, around hi-fi people, salesmen, that they're like real estate agents or ambulance chasers, but they're actually not. You find a lot that are in that role, and it's hard to get employment in those roles because there's not a lot of stores left. So support them. Find these people that are so into audio that they work in the stores and they're passionate, they've got a lot of experience, they've heard lots of different products, you end up getting discounts, and that's the kind of network you should build. Because if you Google up, you know, YouTube videos, I know the irony because you're probably watching this on YouTube, but everyone recommends their own stuff. You need to get to know people that have heard a lot of stuff. And yeah, anyway.
Well, the good news is that my channel is not monetized, nor do I have any sponsors. So you don't have to worry about fake information coming out of it just because I want to make some sponsor happy. So there's at least that element of this. But you are right with the hi-fi stores. And one thing that a lot of folks they miss on the hi-fi side is that they'll go into a hi-fi store, they'll walk around and say, I can't afford anything. Well, the things that they show are the fancy cars. It's like walking in a car dealership. In the showroom, they have the really nice models. You have to walk the lot to see the things that maybe are within your budget range. Most of the time, they do have things in your budget range that they can sell to you. They're just not having them out on the floor. It's like you have to ask for it. So again, if you have that relationship, they'll hopefully point you in the right direction. The other cool thing about hi-fi stores is that a lot of folks end up trading up. So they'll take stuff that they spent, you know, decent amount of money on it. So let's say if they spent $1,200 or about $1,200 on a turntable, for instance, and they bought something new, that hi-fi store might be selling it for several $700 less than what you could buy it new. So for you working on a budget, you could get yourself a really nice turntable or a preamp or an amplifier or even speakers that are, you know, pre-loved, but are usually in good condition, especially if somebody's working with a hi-fi store, right? Most people that are buying from a hi-fi store tend to take good care of their equipment for the most part. So you're not getting something that's been beat to death. It's not like going and buying something at some used electronic store or even a thrift shop. These things typically have been loved, and most hi-fi stores won't accept equipment that's been abused anyway. They have to have a certain level of standard for them to even take it as a trade-in. So just things to think about when you're shopping. But we mentioned a lot about being patient, and we said, okay, the entry table is the RT82. That's the one we should start with if your budget's really tight. And then if you have a little bit more money, about double the budget, that Project Carbon Debut Evo is a solid choice. Now, what if I've been really patient and I doubled my budget again? And I have about $1,000, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But if I really wanted something that was going to blow people away when they came over and I got about $1,000 to spend, what do you think, man? Where should you be? That's a lot of cash for a beginner starting out.
When you get over the $1,000 mark, things really open up. And there's a lot of arguments online about, you know, what's the better thing, or what's, you know, there's an idea where if you don't listen to the certain person, you know, you're assuming that you've made the wrong decision, or they're saying you've made the wrong decision. But once you get above that $1,000 price mark, things don't really sound a lot better or worse, or there's no right answer, because they're all good quality products, or they couldn't sell them. Like, the only one that sort of doesn't kind of belong in that sphere is, and I've checked one out personally, is the U-turn, what's it called, the Orbit, the expensive.
There is an Orbit, yeah.
Obviously, there was nowhere to go for them to bring in more profit. So it's an okay table, but when you're comparing it against your Technics or your Marantz, which is a clear audio product, your Regas, it's not quite there yet. But you've got to admire a company for turning a profit. But yeah, over that $1,000, you're looking at like a Technics SL1210 GR or a Project Debut Pro or a X1 or X2. I've had both of those projects here to check out. They're really good. A Rega planar like 3, Rega P3 or P6 or your Mofi tables. Now, your Mofi tables are really good, but they tend to be a bit overpriced, I think, because they've got the name and the brand. But at the moment, you can go and pick up the Mofi decks because they're running out their old models for an absolute bargain. So a lot of people are picking them up. But when you get to that point of the market, you're kind of looking more about aesthetic or whether you want direct drive or belt or... and it's funny because often, as someone who's serviced hundreds and thousands of turntables, people say, oh, direct drive is more reliable than belt. You've got your consumables. When a direct drive table stuffs up, it's going to cost you a fair bit of money, whereas your belt drive tables, it's usually your belt that's perished. So that's sort of misconception that goes around. Like buying a belt every few years is not like putting petrol in your car. But yeah, so when you get to that price point, you're sort of looking at what cartridge does it come with, because they all sound really good, but they do sound a little different to each other. The Mofis do have the advantage of a longer turn arm, so the radius on the arc is, like when they're moving across the record, you get less inner groove distortion because they have 10-inch tone arms. So that's always something to consider. But yeah, the world's your oyster once you get above that, the Project Debut Pro, and then up to $2,000. There are a lot of really good tables around, which is awesome because the vinyl's taken off, so there's heaps of options. That's one of the great bonuses of it taking off, and all these records that needed to be repressed that hadn't been for decades, they're actually seeing a press now, which is really cool. So when you're looking at that end of the market, as long as you're sticking to those sort of brands, your Technics, your Project, your Rega, your Mofi, Clear Audio, the world's your oyster, really. Like, look at what they look like. They're all very good products, otherwise they wouldn't exist because they wouldn't sell any of them. But it's more about preference and what you're looking for. When you go sort of above that price into silly price tables, you're entering that range of the law of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Where you can pay a heck of a lot of money. But I know you've got a P10 there, which is rad. But that's where you're eking the absolute most out of the last 5% of how things can sound. But you need to have the kind of system around it that reveals that sort of that quality.
It becomes a money pit when you're chasing diminishing returns, for sure. It really does.
Yeah, and the thing to think about when you're in that market is if you can find a really good amplifier that's transparent and doesn't have any character, you can buy that and never need another amplifier. And then if you can find some speakers that are the same, that are really transparent and true to the source, that's a speaker that you'll not have to replace. And then what you can do to tune your sound is your turntable and your cartridge, because if your amp doesn't have any character and your speakers don't have a particular character, then what you're hearing is your source. And you can do a lot with swapping carts and swapping phono preamps, and the best thing is, because you've gone transparent for the last two things in the chain, you're hearing those changes and nothing really conflicts with the rest of your equipment. Because if you bought something that was really bright as a speaker and then you get a source that's really bright, it would be really fatiguing. Whereas if you, at the end of your chain, get things that don't add a lot of their own character to the sound, you can fiddle around with your cartridges and your different turntables and have an absolute ball, which is expensive, but it's one of the funs of the hobby.
So what do you think? We talked a lot about things to look for, and we talked about some recommendations, which is almost when you start getting in 1,000+ range, you start really opening up your choices, which is great that we actually have these choices available today, especially after vinyl was dead for all those years, right? We plenty of options still to buy tables, which is really nice. Is there anything that you should avoid as being somebody looking for turntables? Is there any like beginner's tips, like stay away from this, or here's like a red flag to kind of stay away from?
The first thing is, don't pay $400 for a VG copy of some first press of the. I know there's the thing where you can say, oh, I've got a Vertigo swirl of this record, but in reality it's kind of beat up and it's scratched, and because what happens is when you play it, it doesn't sound that good, but also you're wrecking your stylus. So when you start spending good money, when you start spending a lot of money on your stylus, the last thing you want to do is play damaged records, because I've seen styluses last thousands and thousands more hours than what their lifetime's meant to be. So that's one thing. Like, you're better off buying a new press of something that might not sound as good from a resolution sense, but it's not going to cause you to ruin your cartridges quicker. The other thing is there's a lot of things where people, like your Onzo and your stylus cleaners, and you dip it in, you dip your stylus in a magic eraser, and there's all these things going around that people say is a good idea, and the last thing you should do is stick your hundreds or thousands of dollars stylus in is either some goo or a micro abrasive. Like, I know people say just do it softly. Like, there's no way you would go to your car and try and rub off like a bit of tree sap with a micro abrasive lightly, saying I'm only doing it lightly, because it will damage, because that's what it's meant to do. So the first thing you need to do is just get one of these. It's a stylus brush. Companies like Audiophile say do not touch your stylus with anything but a stylus brush. So that's all you need to keep your stylus clean. Secondly, you keep your records clean. Now, like I said before, turntables are a precision instrument, so you need to keep your records clear. If your tiny little diamond is tracking a groove that's thinner than a human hair, any bit of debris or something, your cartridge will pick it up. If the amount of records I've bought that were VG plus, or a person said add a little bit of noise, and I put through like your Humming Guru, and then they play perfect, is incredible. So the two things you do is only touch your stylus with a brush, a dry brush. Don't use any alcohols or anything. I've seen carts lose their stylus from people using isopropyls and stuff. So despite what people might say that it's fine, it gets to a point where sometimes it's not, and your diamond falls out and you play a record. Anyway, so even if it's just you're using one as a microfiber cloth and a cleaning fluid, keep your records clean, keep your stylus clean. Another thing that I recommend everyone has is this is a spindle hole drill to open up. I've got a lot of Torrens turntables, so they're very tight. You can either just get the drill bit through a hardware store and do it manually, or this is a Clear Audio one. I like them because they've got like a 90-degree angle, so I've got some nerve issues in my neck, so sometimes my hands are a bit funny, but when you're down, it hits the stop and you're being square. They're overpriced. The even better ones are the wooden ones that have a bigger flat surface, or there's an amazing product, I think they're French, it's called a Bic pen. The big pen with the 5 sides. All you need to do is sort of stick it in and open the hole up a little bit, because sometimes records are really tight on the spindle holes. Another thing which costs you $5 is your VTA gauge. I don't know if you can see that. You can get them from Amazon and eBay. They're like $5, so you can check if your tone arm is level. So you don't have your turntable spinning, of course. You sit that in front of your tone arm, and you can see on the lines whether it's perfectly horizontal and parallel with your record surface. So they're like a few bucks. So everyone should have one of them that has a table with adjustable VTA. And these things don't cost much money at all, like the drill bit or a big pen. It's like a few bucks. The other thing I recommend everyone gets is, this is the Project branded stylus, force gauge, but you can get one without this written on it for about $10 on Amazon, and they're fantastic. I used to do a little party trick with people that would get me to calibrate their tables, and I'd say, if I get within 0.1 of a gram manually, double my invoice. If I miss it, I'll call it even and walk away without getting paid. But 0.1 is actually a pretty big variance if you've been doing balancing tone arms a long time. But even if you've been doing it, like I still use one of these every time I do it, just to make sure, because it gives you peace of mind. Because if you've accidentally bumped your tone arm weight, you have no idea. So I occasionally check it to see if my kids have done something nasty, but that means you'll get the longest life out of your stylus. You're not ruining your suspension, and just for peace of mind, for $10, you're making sure you're using the right force. The other thing is, a lot of people on like forums say use a CD to do your anti-skate. I don't recommend that at all, because your CD is like a flat surface, so it's not mimicking a needle sitting in a groove. So this is the Analog Productions one. There's a HiFi News, I think it is, version.
HiFi News, that's correct, yeah.
Test LP, and they're like invaluable because you can use them to set your anti-skate with an actual groove. And all these kind of things you do sort of once and you become a pro. The other thing I would suggest is, people say, just buy a new styli for your existing cart, because then you don't have to calibrate it again. And to me, as a tinkerer, or as someone that's pretty experienced in this, learn how to align your own cartridge. It's one of the funs of being into records and turntables. The precision instrument thing comes through again, because once you've done it once the first time, you do it again and again, and it brings you closer. One of my good friends from the VMP community, he's had an issue where he's moved house and he's setting his turntable up, and he had a minor problem occur, and so I've encouraged him to open his turntable. Obviously told him to unplug it first, but I've explained to him how to fix it, because it brings you sort of closer to your gear. Might be me that falls in love with hi-fi gear, but do things yourself. Like, don't try and avoid calibrating a cartridge because something's easier. It's part of the fun, is learning new skills and new things. So I don't know if that answered your question properly, but
we're in a hobby of physical media, so getting hands-on is part of the experience for sure. Yeah, I agree. And then what's great is that you can help others. Once you learn some of the basics, you can go and help others. And if you're going to be in this, hobby for the long run, you're going to influence others to join you in collecting records, and they're going to come to you. You're going to be the expert. So knowing how to do these things and be able to set them right, it's a watered down, filter down process, whatever you want to call it, right? It's you're handing that knowledge over to somebody else to help get them started.
And like with you, when we're talking about your new cartridge and stuff, I offered to send I'm trying not to swear here, but Dr. Feck Height, the protractor. It's like a fantastic gizmo for setting up cartridges. It makes it really easy. But once you've got something like that, lend it to your friends. Let them use it. Build these networks of people. Like I said before, the most resourceful people that you're meeting in this hobby are people with lots of experience, and people at hi-fi stores and they're the relationships to build, because, you know, there are a lot of clickbait videos around.
There is.
You know, like, and a lot of the advice that's going around isn't great. And the other thing in the hobby that I'll say without you raising it, but with that be patient thing with your gear, be patient too with your record purchasing. Like, if you really, really want that Santana or Abraxas one step or whatever your dream record is, save up and buy it. If you just dismiss, like, you go, oh, I can't afford that, you go and buy 300 other records that you want less, and you will keep looking at Discogs, watching prices go up. Now, the Abraxas one step's probably a bad example because it's ridiculous. But if you buy a $300 record that you really want, that you know you'll play all the time, instead of buying 10 records for $30 that you want less, you scratch that itch. You don't keep pining for this expensive record. And they take up a lot of space. Like, when you start out, you kind of, you might be a little bit naive, like, oh, you know, I've got a 4x4 Calyx, but everyone online will encourage you to keep buying and keep buying and keep buying. So just keep in mind, be patient, buy the records you really want rather than supplementing them with more that you'll play less, because they'll sit on your shelves while you play your favourites all the time. And yeah, don't try not to fall for FOMO. I still do it. It happens.
We all do.
I'm a massive VMP fan, so I find it hard not to get a lot of their stuff. But yeah, it took a long time, but I realised it's a lot smarter to just get the one you actually really want, rather than going, oh, I can't afford that, and then the next thing you know, you've got, you know, another cube full, and you're still pining for that record, and the prices are just still going up and up. So
I have no idea what that's about.
Well, what happens is people put a price and you go, that's ridiculous, and then that price becomes the new norm.
Yeah.
And then people put their prices up, and then the ones that were really expensive are now the cheapest ones, so people buy them. But yeah, it's funny.
Well, it seems like the lesson of the day for anybody that's starting out in this hobby is to have patience. And whether that's patience on getting the right equipment, patience on buying the right record, or patience on learning how to properly set up and configure your equipment, it's all about patience and being able to enjoy the experience, because when you are patient, it pays off. It pays off in the type of equipment you can purchase. You're going to hear things that you never heard before coming from those records. You'll be able to play the records you really like versus having a bunch of stuff that you spin once and never touch again. And then you also get to learn about the equipment and the hobby, so you can share that with your friends and they'll come to you as the expert, which is an interesting dynamic as you continue to evolve through the hobby.
Never forget that it's about the music first, not about how many records you have, how awesome your system is. Like, it's fun to show off, but it's art first.
Well said, and we'll end on that note. VSS, thank you so much for joining me today, this evening, whenever people are watching it. It's such a pleasure to have you, and I hope to have you back on. We could talk about maybe hi-fi gear or something else, right? Would love to. Maybe we'll talk about VMP. But VSS, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your knowledge with me and the community. Really appreciate all the work and effort and all your volunteerism you put into helping people get set up the right way on their turntables, especially the beginners. Because, boy, you need to have a lot of patience yourself to deal with all those questions, the same questions over and over and over.
Yeah, well, the irony is I've been watching all these people starting their YouTube channels, and I'm just like, oh man, stop. But after we both love cars and we both love hi-fi, and we got along, when you said, oh, can you come and help people starting out, the first thought I had was, I don't want to be one of those people, but there are so many misconceptions out there, and there are so many people being misled, and buy this upgraded sub platter, and you're like, but there's a mat in between you. There's a mat, and then there's a platter, and then your sub platter sits underneath it. Like, there's 2 grams of down first. You're not getting that much resonance. There are a lot of things out there now that it's popular, for people to churn a profit. But yeah, like I said, get to know some people that have been in the hobby for decades and ask them about pressings. And the most enjoyable thing about making all these mistakes in your journey is you can help people not make the same one. So thanks for having me on, and happy to help whenever.